I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense, the show that tries to make sense of the world we live in. And I'm pleased today to be in the offices of Common Cause with its Executive Director, John Marion. John, thank you very much for having us in.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mark.
Happy to do it. And Common Cause is by far the most well-known and highly thought of good government NGO that operates here in the Ocean State. And it has a long history and has done some great things, but of course is looking forward to doing greater things, and that's what we're here to talk to John about today. John, tell us a little bit about how Common Cause originated. Define it a little bit for some of our viewers that might not be as familiar.
Sure. So Common Cause was started back in 1970 by a man named John Gardner. Gardner was a former Republican congressman from Texas, had served in LBJ's cabinet, and resigned actually in protest to the Vietnam War. And in 1970 he said, having been a congressman, having run a foundation, having been a cabinet member, everyone in DC was organized. Corporations had PACs, labor unions had PACs, and lobbies. The only people who weren't organized were citizens. So he wanted to start an entity that was, he called it People's Lobby. And so he actually put ads in newspapers around the country, in all 50 states, and asked people to write him and say, I want to start a chapter of Common Cause in my state. About a dozen people in Rhode Island did. The probably best known was Lila Sappensley, a former, she's no longer with us, but a former state legislator and PUC commissioner. And he actually chose a woman named Natalie Jocelyn, who's still with us, still volunteers for Common Cause, gave her a dozen other names and said, go start a chapter. And they did that. In the 70s, we were all volunteer, worked very hard on early campaign finance and sunshine laws. And then in the 1980s, about the time of the Constitutional Convention we had, they started with full-time staff. And then in 1988, they hired a guy named Phil West. Phil was the executive director for 18 years. Most well known for leading the fight on separation of powers, and then retired in 2006. I started in 2008, late 2008, as executive director, and have been here ever since.
That's excellent. And so now, about how many Common Cause locations are there nationwide?
Yeah, so we have a headquarters in DC, and we have about 38 state chapters. Roughly 20 of which have full-time staff. The other 18 or so are run by volunteers. We have a volunteer board here, but we have professional staff, 2 professional staff, myself and a woman named Mala Pongsavan, who run our Rhode Island chapter.
That's excellent. Now, nationwide, obviously here in Rhode Island, but also I assume it would be mirrored in other chapters. Give me an idea of the kind of ratio between your interest in local issues and national issues.
Yeah, so we have a national agenda. We have a national governing board that sets an agenda. We work on a lot of those issues. But Rhode Island being Rhode Island, there are unique issues to our state. I mentioned separation of powers. That was a 10-year fight for us. We're still doing cleanup work on that. And separation of powers was an issue you could only work on in Rhode Island because Rhode Island was the only state without it. And so we were the only chapter, for instance, that worked on separation of powers. We work on a mix. I don't know if it's 50-50, I don't know if it's 70-30, but we work on voting rights, election administration here, as does our national chapter. We work a lot on ethics here. The national entity doesn't work quite so much on ethics. That sort of thing. So it's a mix. Our state board sets a list of priorities every year of what they want us to work on, and that is usually sort of a mix of Rhode Island things along with national priorities.
Sounds like local concerns intrude and force themselves into your agenda and your priorities.
For sure. Separation of powers really does stand out. It was this truly unique issue that I think most Rhode Islanders didn't even understand back in the mid-90s, that we were the only state that didn't have this and hadn't had it for centuries.
How can the average Rhode Islander come to Common Cause and get something? What can get a report, get a white paper, get what do you send out?
So we're a membership organization. All our funding is from individual donors. We get a little bit of foundation support, have a very small endowment. And what you get for being a member is you get our newsletter. We try to send them out quarterly. We do a scorecard, a legislative scorecard every 2 years. But our research, we don't do a ton of research, but our research is open to the public. It's on our website, commoncauseri.org. And we post quite a bit on social media. We post quite a bit of information on that website about our issues. Every legislative session, particularly.
So it sounds like interested Rhode Islanders can come to the website, come to social media, and be plugged into Common Cause.
Yep, and then if you want to volunteer, you can sign up for our email alerts, or you can sign up to be a volunteer, and you can get more involved. So people come in the door, literally, and say, I want to get involved, and some of them, eventually join the board and get very involved. Others just volunteer. So, for instance, on Election Day in November, we'll send poll watchers out just to make sure everything's going well at the polls, and people volunteer to do that. So we'll have hopefully a couple dozen people doing that.
A minute ago you mentioned that ethics is kind of your highest priority right at the moment, and we all understand with the Irons decision that the Ethics Commission, which was founded to be a watchdog for all elected officials and operated quite happily that way until the Irons decision in 2009, if I recall, has now had this big hole put in it, mainly being elected legislators. Tell me a little bit more about what Common Cause is doing to try and rectify that situation.
Yeah, so for people who aren't familiar, Rhode Island is unique in that it has one of the strongest ethics commissions in the country. It deals with all three branches of government. It was created from this constitutional convention in 1986. And in 2009, this Irons decision took some of their jurisdiction away over legislators. Not all of their jurisdiction, but the real key jurisdiction, which is policing conflicts of interest when it comes to legislating. So no longer can the Ethics Commission sanction anybody if they use their elected position as a legislator to financially benefit themselves or their business associates or their family.
So that's really a gaping hole in the authority that the Ethics Commission has, and obviously what's coming up is something to try and rectify that and to give our viewers a preview of coming attractions, because we're coming to the end of our first segment, but there is a referendum on November's ballot, is there not?
Yeah, so question number 2 on the ballot will be the fix to this problem. And we've been working for 7 years to get that fix in place.
Excellent, and we will talk a little bit more about that in the next segment. We'll look on to some of the things that you're looking forward to in the upcoming legislative session. We'll also talk about such hot issues as line item veto. So there's much more to come as we talk to John Marion here at the offices of Common Cause. And right now, we're going to take a break because I have reason to believe someone is about to ask the satiric question, "Are you kidding me?"